Well, hello, hello, and welcome or welcome back to the Lemonade Stand, the Curious Coach's Lemonade Stand, to be precise, with your host, Dr. Gina. So grateful and appreciative that you've taken the time out of your day to stop by our friendly virtual community third spot where you can just drop in and grab something refreshing to quench your thirst and hopefully a little bit of insight, something that makes you go, something that might I don't know, stir up some interesting thoughts that you want to share with a friend, a neighbor, and generally just gives you a moment to think about how we can take life's lemons and turn it into some delicious lemonade. I am so, so excited to have with us here today a very special guest, and I'm going to just hand over the mic to him to tell us a little bit about himself. So without further ado, please do join me in welcoming Joze Piranian.
Thank you, Gina. Appreciate the introduction. A bit about myself. I'll start by saying, for the sake of your listeners, I do have a stutter. Your internet is working just fine. I am a lifelong stutterer turned international keynote speaker, published author, and stand-up comedian. I deliver keynote speeches about courage, among other topics, at organizations. I perform stand-up comedy and comedy clubs, and HarperCollins just published my book this year.
Yay! So, in other words, folks, Jose is all the things I want to be when I grow up rolled into one. So that's why I'm so excited to have him here with us today. And I really want to talk about all the things, but for the sake of time, that last thing that you mentioned, Jose, HarperCollins' new book, Stop Holding Back, that is, I'm going to share with you, dear viewers and listeners, what brought us to this conversation today. So I will say I was in my local library where I'm a very regular occurrence. The library folks know me. And I can honestly tell you guys, it was the first time in life I was shushed by a librarian since I was a kid. And it was because I walked in and there's this wonderful shelf that has it's called New and Hot. And there's a special section of that shelf for CanCon, Canadian content. And I always take a look and see if there's anything interesting there. And I went in a few months ago, and lo and behold, there's this beautiful bright cover with this nice kind of gilded birdcage on the front. And I thought, oh, this looks interesting. And I see, oh my gosh, this is written by Jose. Now,
Ta-da!
there it is. Look at that. It's a beautiful cover, very aesthetically pleasing. Love the color combinations. Now, for background, Jose and I had never met. I'm going to say we were LinkedIn acquaintances. So we were connected there. And I started reading it, took it on March break vacation with my family and I. And so I'm on the beach really digging into this book. And I was just so struck. I had to reach out and say, Jose, we've never met, but this book is just really resonating deeply. And I'm so excited to be reading it. And here we are today to discuss it. So, just to tell you all what brought us to this moment, it is something that so many people can relate to. So, let me start by asking you, Jose, what motivated you to put pen to paper and write this book in particular to share this story?
Thank you, first of all, for t- taking the book on your trip. It has been a joy to receive photos from different readers with my book in Dubai, in Cape Town, in Los Angeles. So it's been great to receive all these photos. Why did I write this book? The short answer is that the publisher reached out to me about 3 years ago, and that led to a conversation that resulted in a book deal. The longer answer is that over the past 9 or so years, I embarked on a journey of turning my fear of speaking into action. I avoided speaking and people for a very long time out of the fear of being judged for sounding different. I was wondering, how will people perceive me? How will they react to me hear if they hear how I sound? For that reason, it was easier for me to avoid avoid people, avoid speaking as a way to protect myself. I went from avoidance to action, and I went on to compete and win public speaking competitions. I delivered multiple TEDx talks, performed stand-up comedy in 3 continents and 4 languages. I stutter in 6 different languages. I aim to test people's patience internationally. So it really was the result of this very unexpected journey of turning fear into action that ultimately led to me being in a position where a publisher reached out to.
That is an absolutely incredible journey, and I have to say, I have a very, very high level of respect for comedians in general, for the art of comedy. I think it's beautiful, I think it's transformative, and I think it's an absolute, um, necessity, especially in these days and times, and so the fact that you've combined these different elements that, any one by itself is very challenging for anyone, but for you to conquer something that, you've protected yourself and how others may perceive and judge you, and to do all of these different channels at the same time, I can very much see how that would culminate in the phone ringing for people to say, "Hey, we want you for this, we need you for that." And you maintain, such incredible humility and an ability to laugh, at yourself and the world, which is a very powerful thing, a very powerful communicating style and tool, I think. So in your book, I was so fascinated by, the way that you describe your process in how you prepare for these kinds of events. So whether it's, a TEDx talk, whether it's being up on stage for a big corporation somewhere on the globe, or whether it's to make people laugh in one of those languages that you speak. What is that process like? I know it's quite long, and, for the benefit of those who haven't yet read the book, can you give us a little teaser about what it takes for you to prepare yourself and be ready for that?
Mm. The two-part answer to this question, on the one hand, there is the action component. On the other hand, there is the mental wellness component. And I think those two things must occur simultaneously. The- on the one hand, I take action. For me, taking action might mean doing my speech therapy exercise of asking strangers at the mall for the 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 directions. For several years, I would challenge myself by talking to 100 complete strangers every single week. And that empowered me to change my relationship with fear and discomfort by becoming more desensitized to people's reactions to me. That is one form of action I have taken. Others might include rehearsing. I'm a big believer in rehearsing before my speaking engagements, before my stand-up comedy. In terms of the mental wellness aspect, it has been crucial to do things like meditation, ice baths, long walks, things that help you focus on the sensations in the body as opposed to being as opposed to being overly focused on the chaotic thoughts of the anxious mind.
Yeah. I really appreciate the holistic approach that you take, and the way that you even distinguish that there are physical things, and I think even many of those will fall into some of the more expected things that you would do to prepare to speak. And yet, if you haven't yet read this book, to think ice baths, what does that have to do with it? Even meditation, I think preparing the mindset is so incredibly important and not something that everyone thinks about. As an executive coach, I very much relate to the concept. When I'm coaching a client who might be nervous to speak in front of people, like I coach a lot of folks around this, their question is, what tools, what tips, and I'd like to focus on very much that second part you just described. Well, how do you want to feel? Let's focus on that. What do you need to feel that way? What kind of practices or rituals do you have in your life that support you feeling that way? So, everything that you're saying, you can see why I'm on the beach going, yes! And people are looking at me in strange ways in Mexico. So, something else you'd covered in the book, and I started to hear a little bit of a flavor of it there in your description of, moving from self protection to leveraging something that, previously held you back into what has catapulted you to who you've become today. And that is that concept of PTG, post traumatic growth. I think right in the introduction, you mentioned it. That's how I got hooked, by the way. As soon as I saw that, I'm like, "Ooh, this is my guy. I know where we're going. Okay, I'm strapped in, buckled up." So, how would you describe the role of post traumatic growth in any of this in your process, in your career trajectory to where you stand today?
I first heard about PTG while I was doing an internship in New York City with a professor of psychology. I was intrigued by the concept of how an otherwise traumatic experience can, under the right circumstances, lead to growth. Of course, there are many variables that contribute to this outcome. However, as a as a possibility, it does bring about a sense of hope and hopefully agency over our lives. In my own case, I can say with confidence that had I not gone through this adversity, chances are I would not have had all these milestones that I've accumulated over the past few years.
Uh-huh.
Whether it's speaking around the world, stand-up comedy, film about my journey, the book, these outcomes, and of course, the personal growth that has occurred as a byproduct of taking uncomfortable action, these would simply not have happened in the absence of that initial adversity.
I truly appreciate that. And I'll give a quick footnote just in case any viewers or listeners aren't familiar with the term post traumatic growth. I often describe it as the other side of the coin of PTSD, which almost everyone is familiar with that post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic growth is really recognizing there can actually not just be a way to stabilize or, go back to normal after a traumatic event or series of events or situations have occurred. There's actually the potential to grow and become better, to advance further, for that, stimulus to actually be the impetus for, as Jose is demonstrating, as he embodies, and is a huge example of the potential for you to become something bigger, better, so much more than perhaps you ever could even have imagined without that adversity, as you point out, to have to work with and through. And so it's really powerful. And I love that you use the word agency because it is so empowering. And I really think that's for me a huge theme of your book is
Mm,
self-empowerment, is to feel you do have control. Stop letting other things, whether it's fear of judgment, different anxieties, how will others perceive me, all of that, is
mhm.
just not, it's not as strong of an opponent when you feel that you are empowered and you have a sense of agency, even in the face of adversity.
It's
There's
key
so many.
to
Sorry.
yeah, sorry to interrupt. It's key to mention that if someone who is listening has gone through a very difficult experience and has experienced a form of PTSD, that it is very normal to experience ramifications after a very difficult event. While I am not a psychologist myself, my understanding is that those two states are not mutually exclusive in the sense that one can have experienced the disorder component of it, and then perhaps with the proper circumstances and steps from that difficult aftermath can emerge opportunities for growth.
Thank you. Very, very well said. I really appreciate you articulating that because that's true. And I hold those myself as well. I think I know I've shared with the viewers here. I have a previous episode if you want to take a look back in the archives. I think it actually has PTG in the title somewhere. It was one of the earlier ones where I was sharing my personal experience back in 2020 of my near death motorcycle accident, and that's when I learned about PTG, is while I was trying to deal with PTSD from, as you said, a psychologist. And I recognized this is so, so necessary for me in this time of struggle and dealing with trauma, to see not just a light, but a really bright light that I could go towards that said, not only can you have control again, you can actually be empowered. This adversity can be something you leverage to become bigger and brighter than you had imagined. And a part of what I did some research on was what are the levers that strategically allow you to sort of hold both, and the PTSD and the PTG. And something that I see in you, Jose, and that I know has greatly helped me is the sharing of your story. That's
Mhm,
actually an incredibly important part of PTG, being able to lend success to a comeback, to, maybe even a very new version of self, is that ability to share the story and to refine
mhm,
the story. And from what I've seen in your book, your TEDx's that I've watched, a little bit clips of your stand up, I see that very much. You sharing yourself with the audience and that reciprocity giving something back to you. Do you feel that when
mhm,
you're on stage?
mm. Abs absolutely. I do think that ultimately sharing my story was single-handedly the most important step th that I took Because if I think about one of the most pivotal moments in my journey, it was the first time I performed stand-up comedy at Second City in Toronto for the first time in my life. I go up on stage and I talk about what for the longest time made me feel deeply insecure, and I make jokes about it. And to me, that was a key moment in my journey. A few months after that, I shared my story on stage in a less comedic and more narrative way. And even if we're talking about our personal lives outside of the stage, outside of of the public, when I go through a difficult time, my first instinct for a very long time was self-isolation, trying to deal with this on my own or through unhealthy coping mechanisms such as rewatching The Ozark on Netflix or whatever show. And I have been getting much better lately at calling friends and calling family and really sh- sharing whenever I a- am going through an ugly moment in my life. So friends, family, and to to be to be transparent with a therapist as well.
Hmm. I appreciate all of that. The fact that, you were saying you were dealing with it through unhealthy means previously, that stood out to me because I think healthy is one of the first words that would come to mind when I think about your process and your approach. And so it's wow, it's a complete 180 is what you've done, and, your honesty and that level of vulnerability, this is courage on steroids, and that's, I think, a huge part of what makes you so inspirational while being so relatable. It's so easy to feel like, "Oh, yes, Jose gets it," as I'm reading your book or as I'm watching you on stage, and the ability to use self-deprecating humor, but to do it in Second City for your first go? Come on, that is huge. Do you think that order was important, that you began with the comedic angle and then moved to narrative? Like, do you think it would have been different if you'd
Great
started
question.
narrative and went to comedic after?
I have never been asked this question before. I do I do like how I did it because stand up involved acknowledging it once and for all with no inhibition, just saying my first ever line on a stand up comedy stage was, I have a stutter, so if you have any plans in the next 48 to 72 hours, simply cancel.
Next, I loved it so much.
First line ever. And to me, that entailed a very contradictory approach compared to what I had done my whole life, which was trying to hide it, trying to avoid speaking, and I would not feel comfortable talking about it. Whereas in that moment, I had to say, uh, hello, world. Here I am. This is me. And that did constitute a key shift.
Ah, it sounds like a total paradigm shift. And so then approaching it from a narrative approach the next time, how is that different? You know, and what if you can sort of take us to your mindset when you got up on stage to do that for the first time?
It was more emotional because it was, I would say stand up was exhilarating and terrifying. Speaking was emotional and terrifying. It was emotional because in my talk, I had to connect with all the emotions I had experienced along the way, the shame, the anger, eh, eh, embarrassment, and feeling unworthy, the sense of rejection, and so on. So it did involve connecting with myself in those different chapters in my life. And it was also through speaking that I had people coming up to me after to tell me their own version of a stutter. And that's how the idea of the inner stutter came about. For a long time, I perhaps selfishly assumed, oh, I must be the only person who deals with such intense fear and so on. And every time I've done a speech, people have come up to me to say, hey, I'm a dancer, but I'm terrified of how people will evaluate me on stage, so I haven't been able to perform for a very long time. Others have told me I deal with substance uh, addiction, and I I have a fear of feeling my feelings. And then this other person told me they know they need to present at work to experience advancement opportunities, but they are terrified. And that's when I realized, hold up, everyone has a stutter. Everyone has an inner stutter, which I define as inaction in the face of fear. And
Mm.
the same steps that I followed to overcome my own fear, others can do too, even if they do not have a physical stutter.
Yes. And I think that's first of all, I'm still stuck on the fact that you thought it might be selfish that you thought that you were the only one that was dealing with it. Just conceiving of it that way tells me about you without you having to tell me about you, Jose. Because can see why people would then come to you after you've come off the stage and want to talk to you and share things with you. Because that almost seems incongruous, right? If people are seeing someone up on a stage and they have an issue that makes them nervous, it makes them feel vulnerable, and all of the, not fun emotions you described, like shame, embarrassment, not really a natural thing that it seems they would walk up to you afterwards. This person who is just on stage in front of hundreds of people, maybe thousands, to tell about that thing that makes me
Yeah,
very nervous or anxious or
yeah.
feel, negatively about myself. So the fact that they're doing that speaks volumes of the level of, I think, safety that you build not only for audiences who are listening to your message, but for the audience to actually take into themselves and apply practically to what's happening and what they're dealing with, especially as challenges in their own lives and feeling like they're being who they want to be and living the life they want to lead. And that's really powerful. If there was one thing that you wanted to leave as an impact with people who read Stop Holding Back or get a chance to see you in your element on stage, what would that be?
Fear and action do not have to be mutually exclusive. For a long time, I held on to this inaccurate assumption that once the fear goes away, I'll finally start taking action.
Hmm.
What I've learned is that we can feel fear, and in the words of author Susan Jeffers, we can feel the fear and do it anyway.
Anyway, one of my favorites.
Whereas I like to say, fear and action can coexist. When we can enter situations in life with that mindset, we no longer wait for the fear to go away
Mm.
before we start taking action. So if I had to share, to leave people with one thing, it's that fear and action can coexist.
Very powerful. And I think, again, such a resonant message that lots of people, I'm sure, will have felt and maybe feeling right now is I will when I do this. And instead, no, feel the fear, do it anyway. And I love that you've just said, fear and action can coexist. It's a
Yeah.
yes and moment, as I learned at Second City. It's they can absolutely be together and be really powerful together too.
Mm,
Wow. Well, I am not shocked at all that this has been such an inspiring conversation today, Jose. I'm so grateful that you took the time out of your busy, global trotting schedule to spend with us and tell us a little bit about yourself and about the great work that you've done. Please, if you haven't come across it yet, Stop Holding Back is a great read. It read really quickly, by the way, too. It was rather disappointing how few margaritas I got through while I read it because it's a page turner. So I want to again thank you, listeners and viewers, for stopping by the lemonade stand. And I hope you got the refreshment that you were maybe not even knowing that you were looking for today from what Jose's poured out for us, because I certainly did. And I'm so grateful for this time spent together. So, Jose, my biggest hug of thanks for all of the wonderful words of wisdom and just for putting yourself up there and sharing with the world that being scared doesn't mean you're not going to do it. There's
mm,
no reason not to.
mhm. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed our conversation today. And for listeners, do feel free to connect with me on Instagram. Yes Way Jose, Joze, or Joze if you're in the States. And my LinkedIn is just my name, Joze Piranian.
Perfect. And I'll make sure those are up on the screen so everyone can copy paste and make it nice and easy. So, again, thank you, Jose, and thank you, everyone, for being here. And until next time, be well and do something that scares you just to see how you're going to grow from it. Lots of love. Take good care.